Welcome to Flying Upstream, the podcast where we uncover the choices, practices, and wisdom that defy mainstream conventions. I'm Kristen.
And I'm Louisa, and together we're here to illuminate the alternative paths that have shaped human experiences through the ages. In each episode, we'll examine ways to move beyond societal norms. We're passionate about how timeless wisdom and unique lifestyle choices can foster healthier, sustainable, and enriching lives.
Join us as we navigate, challenge, and celebrate the beauty and insight of walking the road less traveled. If you've ever felt like you're flying north for the winter while everyone else is flying south, you've found your flock. Welcome back, Free Spirits. Today we've got a very special guest with us. Please help us welcome Diane Garzone. She's going to talk to us today about mental health and ADHD. So I'm going to turn it over right away to Diane to help explain what it is you do and how you're helping people.
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a joy to be here with the both of you. And one of my intents in being in different podcasts is to share my passion for mental health wellness, raise awareness around ADHD, especially in girls and women, and empower people to live their best lives. And I haven't always been in this space, and I just want to backtrack to my journey a little bit. So my parents are immigrants from Colombia, and they moved to Texas when they were both young, and they had my sister. And I was born with a lot of delays. And back then, I'm 51 now, but back then, a lot of the delays really were not talked about. Everything was brushed under the rug, and which led me to feel like something was definitely wrong as a child, but I didn't know how to express it. I didn't know what was wrong. And so I kept those disabilities that I was experiencing very quiet. And just to give you some insight, some of the signs I was experiencing was some motor delays, a delay with crawling and walking, and delays with communication, delays with being able to connect with my peers. The delays I experienced were across the board, which led me as a teenager to struggle with a lot of anxiety, not understanding myself, not really knowing what was wrong. And fortunately, I always had the guidance of certain friends that I felt comfortable being with, and I eventually went to college despite a lot of my learning disabilities and not really having the support I needed to help me with my education. And I scraped by, and with my grades being very low, it caused a lot of self-doubt, a lot of insecurity, a lot of just questioning everything. But despite that, I felt like I needed to go to college to figure out my path in life. And 4 years later, I entered a relationship with somebody I had known for the majority of my life. And once I had children, that's when, for me, the fear that I had felt my whole entire life was at the forefront. And I was hyper vigilant with catching anything my children was struggling with, and I was almost probably overprotective. And instead of just seeking out answers myself, I hired a child psychologist to help guide me, because I felt so lost in who I was as a person and as a mother as well. And having that guidance, for some reason, it really helped to ground me, and it really gave me the drive to keep moving forward, raising my children. We ended up having 4 children. My third child had the most delays. At this point, I still didn't know what was wrong with me. I was struggling with heavy bouts of anxiety at times, but I would push through the fear, and I would have bouts of depression after I had my children, but I would push through as well. And I was in a very unhealthy relationship dynamic with my partner, and I didn't know how to navigate relationships whatsoever. Those skills were never taught, and it caused me to be in an unhealthy dynamic, which led to me getting divorced and and me becoming a single mom when my youngest was about 2.5. So I had 4 kids under the age of 13. And it was the first time in my life where I lived by myself, because I essentially lived at home during college and then went from living with my parents to living with my husband. So I never built that identity of who am I as an individual person. I went from being a daughter to being a wife to being a mother. And in my late 30s, I had to really discover who I was as an individual, aside from being a mother. And it was very vulnerable. It was completely anxiety provoking. And looking back, it was exactly what I needed for my life. I needed to grow, and all of these safety nets, so to speak, that I had in my life, my parents and then my husband at the time, and the security that I had with other people always taking care of me, didn't allow me to grow as a person. And I think I was born a free spirit, but that didn't start to come out until I had a chance to fully ground myself in who I am. But that really came from guiding my children at first. And 2 of my girls were diagnosed ADHD due to just me being hypervigilant with something was wrong with me. I don't want my girls or my children living their whole entire lives thinking something is wrong with them silently. And they were both tested when they were little, and they were found to have some learning delays. My younger daughter had significant delays, and when she was entering 6th grade, that's when I decided to have her tested again, because we were seeing some signs that definitely needed some attention. But again, me not knowing what to do or how to navigate that drove me to get her retested, and it confirmed the ADHD diagnosis. Just to provide this information for your listeners, because a lot of people may be asking, how do I know, or how do I get my child tested? Sometimes insurance covers what you call a neuropsychological evaluation. I Googled neuropsych in my area, and there was an office, luckily 5 minutes away, that did all the testing for my children. And my younger daughter received 3 different tests 5 years apart. When she was entering 6th grade, I was sitting in the waiting room, and I was completely separated at this time, raising kids 70% of the time by myself. And as I was sitting in the waiting room, I saw a pamphlet that said, "We test adults too." And for me, whenever I saw signs, I really took it in as a true sign of somebody guiding my path. So I scheduled my appointment, and that's when I discovered at 42 years old that I had ADHD as well. And for me at the time, I really couldn't fully process that information. And I couldn't process that it was hereditary. I couldn't process that a lot of what my daughter was experiencing, I probably experienced myself. And my job at the time was to continue finding her the supports that she needed so she wouldn't feel as lost as I did when I was her age. And because she was set up with all these supports, she ended up in the National Honor Society in high school, which is so amazing. I'm so proud of her for working so hard. And despite her support, I remind her she did the work. Despite the support, she did the work. And whenever she was graduating high school, there was a disconnect happening in her mind, and I couldn't exactly pinpoint it. And she was telling me that she wanted to go to school on the other side of the country. And this was a child who struggled with friendships, who struggled with navigating relationship dynamics. It was due to executive functioning delays because of her ADHD. And I guess I didn't understand that the depth of her executive function delays because a lot of the supports I was seeking out were supports outside of our home, such as therapists or teachers' aides. And whenever she told me that she wanted to go to school across the country, it wasn't connecting. And so that was a sign for me to have her tested one more time. And whenever the doctors asked me, why are you having her, it's a valid question that they ask all the parents, what is your concern, or what is the reason why you're having your child tested? And I said, there is disconnects happening in her life, and I believe there's pretty significant executive functioning delays that is causing the disconnect. And I believe she's living vicariously through other people, not knowing some of the risks that she was taking at the time wasn't in her best interest. They were risks that could have been unsafe had I just let her go across country. And so they tested her, and the doctors came back and they asked me, how did you pick up on this? How did you know this? A lot of parents don't pick up on executive function delays in their children because they're hard to pick up on just from the eye of a parent or the eye of a therapist. And I said, I've been her advocate for her whole life, and I felt like something was wrong. And so I started observing her and her behaviors and trying to understand, how can a child with pretty significant delays come home, feel so happy, and she's skipping around the house, but she doesn't have the connections that most kids her age, which helps to keep a teenager feeling grounded. A lot of relationships, whenever teenagers have relationships, that's what helps us feel secure, whole, even though it doesn't come from an internal. For teenagers in that age group, it usually needs to come externally. And I didn't know where she was getting that kind of sense of security from. And so whenever the doctor told me, how did you pick up on this? How did you know? That's when I started to believe that I had a really deep intuition that was trying to guide me my whole entire life. And I didn't trust myself. I kept shooing it away. No. I would pick up on the signs throughout my whole entire journey, but it wasn't truly until she had this appointment, we got the results, where I truly started to believe in the power within. And I believe we all have that power within to truly listen to ourselves, quiet the mind, regulate our emotions as best as possible, and just really listen to that inner voice. And I think a lot of the anxiety I felt in the past wasn't because I was listening to that inner voice, and it caused a lot of dysregulation, it caused a lot of anxiety, it caused a lot of impulsivity, which is all attributes of having ADHD. But I have since realized that when we find strategies that work best for us as individuals to help calm our nervous system, heal our nervous system from past traumas or whatever happened in our life, then that voice starts to come up and we can hear it a little bit louder. Ever since the doctors shared that information, I went down a rabbit hole and I started researching executive function. I started looking more into, why isn't this being talked about in the community amongst women? Why are a lot of women suffering in silence? Why aren't doctors talking about this? Why aren't pediatricians educating us on signs and symptoms at an earlier age? So I'm currently on Instagram at the ADHD strategist, because I found a lot of different strategies that work to help manage our ADHD holistically. And I'm trying to raise awareness of signs and symptoms that are very similar in a lot of girls, in a lot of women, in hopes to be a small part of the solution in the future.
I love that, Diane. I have a question, if it's okay.
Yes, of course.
There's this big controversy with regards to medication. I wonder what your take is on medication versus the behavioral therapy and the holistic options that you offer. Now that we're diagnosing it a lot more frequently, maybe not enough, but do you feel we're relying too much on medication, that maybe it's like a quick fix or something? What is your take on that?
That is a really great question. So when I first got diagnosed, I tried the medication and it was helpful. And the reason why I believe medication is helpful for a lot of people that have ADHD is because with ADHD, very often comes behavioral issues as children. And a lot of parents who are not being educated by service providers such as therapists, child psychologists, and pediatricians, they punish the kids for negative behaviors, and the child doesn't really have control over their nervous system. So they're impulsive and it comes out in a lot of different ways. And the punishment that probably most children experience causes the trauma, and which is known as complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you have ADHD and CPTSD, then you can become an adult that is struggling with pretty significant trauma. And what the medication does is it really helps to give your brain the dopamine it needs in order to feel a little bit more alert, feel a little bit more focused, be able to do daily tasks that somebody with ADHD and trauma probably couldn't do. Because whenever you're executive functioning, that part of your brain that helps you manage emotions, it helps you organize your thoughts, helps you organize, it helps you plan. It takes a step-by-step structure in order to manage life, manage your day. And whenever you're not supported in childhood, your executive functioning in adulthood will have pretty significant delays. And so you need to find coping mechanisms in order to be able to function. And part of that is, for a lot of people, is medication. Because if you're trying to holistically treat ADHD and you have trauma, you're always going to be a nervous wreck. And when you're a nervous wreck, your brain gets flooded. You can't think things through. You can't plan. You can't control your behaviors. You can't control your thoughts, which leaves a lot of people feeling numb, feeling paralyzed. That's the benefit of taking medication. Whenever my daughter was diagnosed, I was probably a few years into taking the medication. And for me, the medication acted as almost a Band-Aid for the depression I felt, which really was the heaviness that I felt with the ADHD. And then when the doctors were like, "How did you know this about your daughter?" And somebody truly believed in me and in my intuition, the medication at that point made me a little bit too anxious. So having the validation from the doctor somehow did something to my nervous system. It made my nervous system on a subconscious level relax. And I'm spiritual as well. And all my chakras felt very aligned for the first time in my life. And because all of my chakras felt aligned, the medication no longer was working for me in terms of, I no longer needed it as a Band-Aid, because I was feeling that euphoria of feeling so aligned in my thoughts and who I am and my intuition. And I changed everything at home. I changed the way I parented my kids. And they saw me more as a collaborative leader versus relying on service providers to help guide me and support my children. I turned everything around, and I finally was able to provide something that my kids had always craved and needed, which is unconditional love and support, me listening to them without asserting my opinion, and just showing them unconditional love each and every day and guiding them when necessary. Because through the unconditional love and support, my children were able to trust me with their inner deepest thoughts. After my divorce, I was introduced into the coaching world by chance, and I learned all these skills. I was able to use all these skills and pour them into my children. And so I was able to coach my children and being their mom at the same time. Luckily, I feel so blessed saying this, they trust me enough to advise them when need be. And for the most part, I have 4 children. My oldest is in medical school. My second is working in Boston professionally. And my third, who has significant delays, is at a local college doing really well. And my youngest is in high school. And for the most part, they know they have a parent that loves and supports them, can help guide them through any difficulties in life. Life is not perfect. It will never be perfect, but we all know that life will come with obstacles. It will come with setbacks, and we will need to take the time to sit there and process them. And sometimes it comes with tears, and sometimes it comes with all these emotions, but we all know that it's just a moment in time, and we will get through this, and we will get to the other side. And I learned that through my own personal journey of feeling so lost in my life, and finally getting to moving through those emotions, healing from my traumas, and getting to the other side through doing the deep, heavy work of inner child healing. And for me, the inner child healing work came from helping my children navigate and teach them ADHD, help them understand executive function. I didn't know I was healing myself at the same time.
That's so sweet.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm curious to know your opinion on this because I've heard in recent years that the diagnosis for ADHD has gone up. And I'm wondering, do you think it's because there is more awareness? There's people like you out there really making a difference? Or do you think it's become a bit trendy now to be diagnosed with it and to get on medication? I've heard stories of kids going on the medication to do better in testing to get into good college. Is there abuse of this, or is it because people are just doing a better job of catching it?
I think with almost any circumstance in life, you're always going to see both positives and negatives. Nothing is ever just plain and linear. I did see in the news a few weeks ago that there is an increase in diagnosis due to a lot of women sharing online about their stories and their journeys. I do think that's the reason why more people are getting diagnosed. The DSM-5 only showed ADHD in boys, and there wasn't enough research done in girls and women. And the way ADHD presents in girls is very different than the way it presents in boys. And we are still so far behind in understanding ADHD in women. And really, fortunately, I'm glad there are a lot of people talking about it, especially people who have been formally diagnosed, and not people who are saying, oh, I think I have ADHD. I think people who have been formally diagnosed has more credibility, I should say, but I hate to say that at the same time, because for a lot of people, getting formally diagnosed is a privilege because insurance do not always cover the exam, or the exam is not accessible to a lot of people. And there are also a lot of traditional doctors who are telling their patients, no, I don't think you have ADHD, and really dismissing the patient's concerns about how they're feeling and getting help and getting relief.
So glad you mentioned that. I have a background in disability, and you mentioned the neuropsychological evaluation earlier, and I had thought of this, and as you mentioned it again, it comes back up because a lot of the clients that I worked with, they experienced a lot of hurdles trying to get insurance companies to pay for a neuropsychological evaluation. These evaluations are extremely expensive. They're extremely gruesome, right? I know that some of my clients, when we would send them for these evaluations, they were 2-day evaluations of 8 hours a day each. It's gruesome. It's for someone already going through a lot, it's a lot and extremely expensive. Is that something that is still happening? Are we experiencing that? Did you have any of that experience? Do you see a lot of that out there in the work that you do? The insurance just making people jump through these hurdles?
So I don't know, have you guys joined Threads yet? Okay, so
Yeah.
Threads is an app. It's an offset of Instagram, connected to Instagram. And Threads started up about a year ago, and it's become a community for neurodivergent, including autism and ADHD. And it's really interesting hearing the stories of so many people because you gain a lot of insight to what is really happening with people who are struggling. And I'm hearing stories from other people saying that in the UK, there's a waiting list for 2 years. And just all over the world, there are different places where it's not easy to get tested. And people have been struggling ever since they were children. And they're in their adulthood just not being able to manage their life, manage their day, and they're just completely paralyzed, which is really frightening
Yeah.
and saddening as well.
Yeah, that's got to be hard.
For me, scheduling that exam, I called. The exam was scheduled 3 weeks later. I didn't have to go through any hurdles. And again, saying that I now know after being on Threads, after being part of this community, it is a privilege that I had for my insurance to be able to pay for it, for me to be able to schedule it 3 weeks out, for me to be able to understand how my brain is working and guidelines, because the testing provides guidelines as to what would be helpful for somebody who has ADHD as an adult.
Dan, you shared so many good things with us today. I'm curious to know, what is the number one lesson that you have learned throughout your entire journey?
I think my number one lesson is to listen to that inner voice, because that inner voice truly guides us. And in order to find that inner voice, we really have to quiet the mind, find techniques to quiet the mind as best as possible. And the second is to ask for support, ask for help. No one is alone in their struggles. No one has their life all together. And I thought everybody had their lives all together and I was the only one. And what I learned from working in the mental health field is everybody has challenges. And fast forward to my life today, I believe having a skill set, learning a skill set really helps us to overcome challenges, navigate challenges, and having the support to teach us a skill set can really help us persevere and overcome.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of this.
I think just last question would be, what advice do you have for other parents out there who may have suspicions, but they don't know where to start, or even adults who suspect they may have their own challenges? What would you say for somebody who's a little hesitant and unsure?
I would say to stay open-minded, reach out to online communities, ask questions, stay curious. For me, catching the disabilities in my children at a younger age has really propelled them forward in life later on. And my children, even though they do have obstacles, they have the skill set in order to, as I mentioned earlier, push through. Had I not caught it early, I think we would be looking at potentially more mental health challenges. And my biggest advice for parents is to observe your children's emotions, their behaviors, milestones. There's a lot of books that show us a range in milestones. And that's how I was able to pinpoint some of the delays in my children by having the guidelines of understanding milestones. But early detection is really important in order to really give them a mental health boost later on in the future.
That's great. Thank you so much, Diane, for sharing your wisdom today about ADHD and all that it can bring to life. And for all our free spirits out there, thank you for joining us today, and we can't wait to see you next time.
Thank you so much.
right, free spirits, that's all the time we have for today on Flying Upstream.
We hope this episode sparked your curiosity and ignited a desire to explore the extraordinary paths less traveled.
Even when the current feels strong, a whole world of possibilities awaits.
We'll see you next time on the other side of mainstream.
So keep questioning, keep challenging, and most importantly, keep flying upstream.